I am talking with Canadian composer John Greer in Winnipeg. No, where are you? Winnipeg, yeah?
Yeah.
Yep. We've had a chat a little bit before. I have a very brief but fond memory of Winnipeg back in my youth, my early career. We're talking about his 2017 Centre Disc, Canadian uh, record company, Centre Disc release, Sing Me at Midnight, a collection of his songs with probably a handful of the best singers in Canada. Mezzo. We're going to talk about these people. I'll ask you to give me some info later. But mezzo soprano Dolores Ziegler, soprano Tracy Dahl. What an incredible voice. Baritone Kevin McMillan. And then there's this guy John Greer at the piano. His whole career has been, as we talked earlier, John, kind of you've had your finger in the soup forever, including as a pianist, as a collaborative pianist. And this recording, before I forget, when we get into the conversation, but before, so forgive me everybody while I yammer a bit longer. Perfect sound engineering. It's absolutely magnificent.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a little bit of a Frankenstein's monster because the cycles were recorded when myself and my very busy academically and performance involved colleagues were available. So it was sometimes, sort of on the run, and it was in, I think, two were made in Winnipeg, but the other two were made in.
I'm sorry to say we'll have to pause while the ambulance goes by. 1 second. It's busy. Oh, that looked like undercover cops. Anyway, big city, Santa Barbara. It's just teeming with activity. Forgive me for these noises. It is rush hour just outside my little apartment. You were saying, what were you saying?
Yeah, sorry, I was just saying that recordings were made in different places.
Yeah.
I did have Joe Dudich here in Manitoba was the sort of final arbiter of how to put them all together onto the album. It was a long and I think 6 year long process all
Oh, yeah.
told.
And also, I think I do in fact understand what you have just described, because there is a difference in the, I don't know, it's sort of like being underwater. You can kind of hear the sound quality of a particular room. I don't mean just acoustic, but and so there is a slight little bit of difference in the sound acoustic, I suppose is the word, on a few of these. But the real bottom line is it's one of the most beautiful song CDs I have heard in a long time, and I'm listening to a lot of wonderful, wonderful music, but this is just absolutely gorgeous, and it's because you are an absolutely brilliant composer. I'm sorry, I'm blown away by your professional by your composing. It's fabulous. Let me do the quickies and then we'll get going. So we'll talk about the soloists in a bit, but John Greer, who is this guy? Professional accompanist, vocal coach, conductor, arranger, composer, etc., etc., etc. Graduate University of Manitoba, and you spent some time at USC. So, of course, as a Southern California guy, I immediately recognized you studied piano with Gwendolyn Koldovsky and Brooks Smith, two of the greats at University of Southern California. Harpsichord with Malcolm Hamilton. I mean, everybody who was in music at any time in our formative youth, and for me it was in the 70s. I mean, everybody knew Malcolm Hamilton. Music director at various prestigious American schools, Opera Theater, Rochester, at Eastman, Opera Studio at the University of Maryland, on and on and on, coaching, lecturing, all over the country. Little wonder that you know what you're doing. So, but I wanted everybody to know that really we're in the presence of a really great vocal composer. I believe. I know you've done other work, but this is clearly, I think, your forte. What do you think? Opera?
Well, absolutely. All the music I write is somehow related to singers, either solo singers, choral singers, chamber music, whatever, and almost always text driven. In other words, I find a text that really inspires me, and that inspires everything from the style up in terms of the song cycle. So I really am dedicated to creating vocal music, and working with singers has been my lifelong love.
Okay, I stand absolutely and totally corrected, but I knew. I mean, it's obvious. And by the way, I have a question for you. But we're talking. By the way, this is beautifully put together. 4 song cycles on the CD. I got that right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 song cycles. Incredible choice of texts. We'll talk about them, and then just the gorgeousness of your writing is really stunning. But I guess what I hardly know which one of you to chat with, because you have your finger in so many activities. But in fact, you're a polyglot.
I am, yeah, Polly something like this.
Poly something. I mean, because of your interest in opera and your conducting and directing, yes, opera coaching.
Oh, not stage directing, but no, but conducting productions and coaching singers, of course.
Yeah, of course.
That was my potatoes for the whole central part of my career.
Aha. And nothing to say nothing of what a brilliant pianist you are. And boy, you can really tell a collaborative pianist.
Yeah.
When everything just fits beautifully between singer and pianist. That's you. You're the expert. Everybody must come to you, at least in greater Eastern Canada. Or let's see, what else? You've written 12 song cycles, 2 children's operas. Very, very interesting because of the lovely tunes that I have heard on this. I can just hear these 2 children's operas. Beautiful and accessible. Vocal chamber music we've discussed, a comic opera. Who got you into this? I mean, was it mom? Was it dad? Was it, you're a Winnipegger? Was it something about those long winters? What?
I started playing the piano as most Canadian kids did. In the prairies, it was very common to have a piano in the household when we were growing up, and all the children would learn how to play. And some would enjoy it, and some would go a little more forcefully to the piano. But I loved it. The minute we got a piano, I absolutely took to it, and all things musical suddenly became the center point of my life. It was sort of obvious by the time I graduated from high school that was going to be where I was headed. I remember in high school in grade 12, my project relating to Hamlet, the play we were studying, was to write a musical version of Hamlet with a colleague of mine. So, how are you, Hamlet? It was obvious that I really was interested in that sort of thing right from the beginning. And I was encouraged by my family and very grateful for that. And I always had wonderful teachers and mentors along the way, which I can't express too much appreciation for as well, like people like Gwendolyn Kodowski at Vika. So I guess I sort of came upon it. I always sang. I sang in the church choir here. I loved singing. I studied it at university, but I didn't really have a voice per se. I found that out very soon. And I knew how well my singers were able to sing, and I realized, I want to be involved in this. Be a collaborative pianist, an accompanist, we called them then, but it was, for me, the most rewarding and satisfying and stimulating work I could think of, and I've never looked back.
Not only that, you've met everybody important everywhere as a collaborative pianist.
I've been lucky in Canada. Canada's a very small place. I mean, the vocal world in the United States is a small place, but in Canada, it's a microcosm, And it was just so wonderful to have all those colleagues. I moved to Toronto as a young professional. It was my first sort of, professional city, I guess you'd say. And it was the perfect place to be. It was the hub of so many cultural things in Canada, especially English-speaking Canada, and a wonderful opportunity for me. And that also had a great deal to do with my composing. That was where I was required to write my first arrangements for performance, where I was first commissioned to write a song cycle. So it all happened starting in Toronto.
But you're okay with Winnipeg, right? It's a big city. Come on now.
Yes, I have every fond of Winnipeg, and many of my compositions have been written for people here, and also many of my premieres have happened here. So it's a very significant city for me in that reason, and it's a city that really supports its native children, you might say, and I really appreciate that aspect as well.
Wonderful. And what I'd like to know is, well, first of all, why don't you give me the story of how you met these particular soloists, mezzo, Dolores Ziegler, soprano,
yes,
and so on. Give me these 3 wonderful solos that you've worked with on this CD.
Dolores in with the group as a Canadian. Unfortunately, Canada can't claim that wonderful artist.
Oh, really? Is she a Yankee?
She is. She's now a member of the voice department at the University of Maryland. That's where we met. We were both rookie professors there together one year, and we've done many, many performances together. She has probably performed The House of Tomorrow, the cycle that we've recorded on this disc, more than any other person has in numerous recitals and in numerous formats. So it was a wonderful opportunity that we had to actually record it. I was hoping that it was written for Catherine Robin, very well-known Canadian mezzo-soprano, and Catherine retired before she was able to record the song cycle. So the fact that Dolores was available was, absolutely
a big,
it was she's the perfect person for it, really.
A big, stunning, powerful, no nonsense, yummy voice, tremendous. What about soprano Tracy Dahl? This is an incredible voice.
Tracy Dahl is a neighbor of mine here in Winnipeg, so we're, we know one another from quite a while back. And I was commissioned. She commissioned me to write The Red, Red Heart. She was doing a recital for the CBC. It was going to be broadcast on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and it was taking place right around Valentine's Day, I think the 14th of February. So she requested a cycle for that concert. I ended up writing The Red, Red Heart. And all the pieces she did on that program were somehow related to love. Of course, it's pretty easy to find art songs about love, but her program was very wonderfully sort of, what do you call it? Love-centric, I guess you'd say, and it featured The Red, Red Heart. She created the cycle and has been its absolute sublime best interpreter ever since it was written, so I'm so glad she recorded it.
By the way, it just occurred to me that singers of all kinds must be very grateful to you, because the songs, art songs, and more popular, I can't figure out where to peg you particularly, because the tunes are so gorgeous, but these seem very much written for the voice with knowledge of the human voice. I mean, I have a feeling singers just love singing your music.
Well, I hope so. I write it. I try to think, what would I love to do if I were a singer? I just put myself in their shoes as much as possible. And of course, I'm fortunate to know all three of these singers extremely well as I was writing for them. So that really made a huge difference too. I didn't only hear a voice in my head, I heard their voice in my head singing that. And still, Tracy Dahl is a coloratura soprano with an extremely easy natural upper extension. And I remember writing certain things, up to say A natural. I thought, oh, this will be a beautiful high suspended note. When I heard Tracy sing it, it really sounded like it was in the middle of a record. So I'd have to transpose it up a third so that it would have that kind of really beautiful shimmering effect. And I'm sure singers who tried to sing that cycle ever since have cursed me because of that. But it was really something that just suited Tracy to a T. And yet, she is as comfortable singing a popular song. But she is awesome melodies, and she has a beautiful resonant middle register.
Yeah, a huge tessitura, very long, very large range. Yeah. And how about Kevin McMillan, baritone Kevin McMillan? I was so taken by his voice. It's very unique, really stands there and speaks. I can't figure any other way to discuss his voice. Tell me about Kevin.
Kevin's a unique singer in that he's probably done much more recital singing compared to oratorio or opera singing than any other singer of his generation. And boy, has that ever held him in good stead. I mean, I've performed probably more concerts with Kevin than any of the other artists on the program. Schubert, the big cycles together, Die Schöne Mühren, Winterreise, etc. We've done Schwanengesang. We've done, most big French cycles. We've done a lot of the big English repertoire. He and I have done a lot of touring together, and so we've done multiple performances of recitals, including recitals that have included Sing Me at Midnight. So, I really know his voice, backwards and forwards, I guess. And a pleasure writing for him. He was the one that suggested to me the Wilfred Owen. And the reason was he had just sung in the War Requiem. And as he was preparing the War Requiem, he read the poems of Wilfred Owen. And it's filled with not only war, anti-war, wonderful sonnets in really the Shakespearean style. That's the only way I can describe it. And love sonnets, and these made a beautiful sort of a cycle in addition to the war songs, and they all have a certain relationship.
And we'll discuss Wilfred Owen when we kind of have a look. I want to have a look at some specific pieces. And boy, is that a terrible story. You'd think his life story would be enough to keep us from ever going to war again. What a waste! What a tremendous waste of talent. I mentioned the two children's operas. I mentioned the gorgeous texts that you have chosen for these 4 sets of song cycles. What is that? How do you make these decisions? Where do you find these delicious poets? And we must speak to the poets. They're all fabulous.
As I say, Kepl was the one who drew my attention to Wilfred Owen. I read the book. My imagination was just immediately caught, fire burning, the possibilities there. So I'm very glad for that. For the House of Tomorrow, when Catherine commissioned me,
keep going. Yeah, I lost you just for a little bit, but when Catherine Owen,
Catherine Robbins suggested Khalil Gibran's poem to the children from his The Prophet, and she said, and maybe some other poems. So I just went looking. I found some Robert Louis Stevenson. I found a Victorian rhyme. I found a translation of a Russian text with it, which it turns out Rachmaninoff has also set. So it was, it all seemed to come together that way. Sarah Binks was suggested to me. We'll talk about her, but Sarah Binks' songbook is based on songs written by this fictitious Canadian poet who is extremely well known by people of my generation and older and maybe slightly younger, but she was created by a chemistry professor at the University of Manitoba, this fictitious poetess. The Sweet Songstress of Saskatchewan was her nickname. She was sort of a poor man's Emily Dickinson. She was as enthusiastic as she was, unique in her use of words and imagery, and she really tried to sort of capture the exact nature of the prairies in her poems. They're really entertaining on so many levels, the literary level, the Canadiana level. She was a real sort of one of the first women's libbers, so on that level. Anyway, once again, there was an embarrassment of riches there, and those were suggested to me by Maura Kuhn, an old friend of mine in Toronto, when she knew that I needed some material for a lighthearted cycle. And I think that's probably the cycle that's been the most performed of mine. Since then, I've even written a second set of 7 songs, the Sarah Binks Bestiary. They're all songs about different farm animals. So,
and I love the word bestiary. It comes so close to being pornographic. I don't know. Listen, I'm going to use a quote from you because it exactly suits where we're talking. It says, you have said, quote, I attempt to write or arrange songs that fill a significant and specific need on the contemporary recital platform, end quote. And I thought to myself, why do I like this CD, Sing Me at Midnight, so much? Can you give me an overview of how you perceive this CD that you have put together and its influence in terms of text and music and song and this significant, a specific need in our contemporary world now? Have I made any sense at all?
You have. I mean, we live in a world where unfortunately academic music and popular music have sort of gone in totally diverse directions, so that you almost can't be in the world of one and still participate in the other. It's almost gotten that. A few artists are very good at managing a crossover, but it takes a great deal of conviction.
Yeah. Did that answer anything?
Yeah. So I think for me, I think the style is dictated by the text. That's all I can say. If it's a sentimental song about childhood, I love being sentimental. I'm absolutely not ashamed to be sentimental. I think, some of the great sentimental songs are some of the ones we love the most. So I am that way. If, as in some of the songs from, there's one of the songs that in The Red, Red Heart, which is a song of desolation and sort of isolation from the world. It was perfectly natural to use a tone row writing that song, and it's actually a 12-tone piece, one of the few I've written, but that's a place where I think 12-tone writing is absolutely effective and useful, more useful than any other kind of writing might be.
I've heard a lot of I've had not a lot, but one or two composers recently who have very deliberately used the 12 tone row idea, but it's in such subtle disguises
Yeah,
that I
well,
never would have heard. No, that is probably your most serious piece, I think, on the CD, maybe.
yeah, well, that and the Wilfred Owen songs. There's
Of
some like
course,
What Passing Bells is Piece of God's Cattle.
yeah.
That also a very, monumental sort of anti-mood song, big pieces in that way. And once again, using totally different techniques, tone clusters and,
Sure.
uh, all kinds of other devices for the first part of the sonnet. Then for the second part, um, I kind of a walking bass, which features the hymn tune Saint Anne, "O God, our help in
Amazing.
ages past," which sort of wends its way through this walking bass and adds to the comforting nature of the text.
Yeah.
So it's what style of content I use in the song as much as I can.
And I'm trying to figure out. Are you near an airport?
No,
Excuse me, because I'm trying to figure out how come you occasionally will fade out on me a little bit. And partially,
okay, I'll lean forward a little more to my
okay.
microphone.
And excuse me, that's also, of course, that when traffic goes by, it just kind of wreaks havoc with the microphone. So with all those apologies, but let's now go through the four song cycles, not in great detail, but just touch on them a little bit. I just had a look at my notes. Let's begin with the Red Heart, Marianne Bindick. What a
Yeah.
marvelous poet! What a marvelous poet!
Well,
Uh,
I think so. She's well known in sort of friend circles in Toronto, but I think she's yet unpublished as a poet, but she's actually, like me, a bit of a poly artist in that she began as a singer. She's sung the role of Carmen with opera companies in Canada. She's, sung many recitals, but she's also a great writer, and I'm glad you think that.
yeah, I do. And also, by the way, just to touch on engineering again, diction, perfection
Yeah.
throughout the CD, so important. And just without effort, the diction is absolutely perfect. What I put a whole bunch of is the beginning. I put a whole bunch of stars after it. Wasn't that your first piece or something, or it's one of your earlier works? The beginning,
No,
that section.
children's songs. The children's songs were my earliest songs, but uh, uh, yeah, I think it was about a decade later that I wrote the Red Red Heart. And In the Beginning was the first of those songs.
And that's where I think of Bernstein and Candide,
Hmm.
because of the wonderful coloratura writing that you.
That's right. Well, if you have a coloratura soprano, you might as well make
Uh,
use of her.
Absolutely, it's moody. It's like I have a note here that says it's kind of like a very high-class musical tune. It's your music is so deliciously tuneful, and that's what made me think of Bernstein. Beautiful tunes. They're opera arias really in Candide, but they're lovely tunes as well. Very difficult. We've discussed, or have we? Her incredible range. And then
Hmm.
and as you said, if you got a coloratura, throw a bunch of stuff at her and see what happens. And she's just superb. Naked in the city streets, serious, kind of a recitativo of sorts. I don't know.
That's the piece that was 12 tone. That's
Ah,
yeah,
it's
kind of
touching. And I love the quote, "I am defined by strangers." How true. My mother's hand. Here's what I have to say about it, and then you talk to me. What do I say? In my notes, I see my mother's hand. Simply superb, gorgeous, moving, pertinent text for all of us about parents, and deeply moving. It's gorgeous.
Well, it's especially moving to me these days. My mother passed away just a little while ago, in March of this year, and the piece deals with the fact that all through our lives we rush through our own lives, barely noticing what's happening to our parents, just taking them for granted. And to this day, I think Marianne Bindick is very prolific, but I still think that's one of her best and most iconic poems, and it's probably also one of my most performed songs.
And laughter is just plain fun.
Yeah, laughter's not so fun for the performers. It's really, really hard. It's not only the fast changing harmonies and the multimeter sort of things, but well, there's so many things in it that make it tricky. The effect of it is a very fun and exhilarating, but that's true. So.
That was either my roast coming due or something. I heard a big alarm going. And then the Red Red Heart, the title song, if you will, for this song cycle. Gorgeous love song. And it's a perfect concert hall piece. So let's get the word out, because you have such beautiful, beautiful music that should be performed more by more artists. I'm hoping a lot of Americans are going to say, wow, who is this guy? This stuff's great. All right, let's talk Wilfred Owen.
Yes.
Sing Me at Midnight.
One of Britain's most famous early 20th century poets died in the trenches 6 months before the armistice that ended the war. He was a very young man in his early 20s, and really was just coming into his own as a poet. And he's still recognized as one of the greatest poets, even though his career was barely starting. But those were really inspiring poems, and I think I sort of cover in the 5-song cycle 5 different styles of poetry and of content in terms of the war, in terms of love. He was a very private person that way. His poems are very private that way, sort of Shakespearean in nature, I guess you'd say. Like Shakespeare, he didn't wear his heart on his sleeve in his writing, but if you look deep enough, you can see all the different sort of ebbs and flows of his personality.
Yeah, and rather enigmatic.
He could.
Yeah, very enigmatic. All right, Sarah Binks. Have we talked her to death? But I love her. I love this woman. I've never heard of her before. Sarah Binks Songbook, again with Tracy Dahl.
Mm-hmm.
Go.
I hope if people like the song cycle, I hope they might read Sarah Binks, which is her quote unquote biography written by Paul Hebert. So he pretends to be the music critic Rosalind Drool, and he's sort of writing about Sarah Binks, and all her poems are included. And one of the poems she loved to translate from the German. She was very proud of her German translations because they were she captured the essence of the German language in English. So when she translates Heine's "Du bist wie eine Blume," she says, you are as if. Me is as if the hands I on head yours put them should. And the weird thing is that it's a literal translation of the German. But to hear those words sung to Schumann's music, which you hear in my song, the first song of the cycle, is really entertaining.
Very, very funny, as is her elegy to a calf, Lamento Pastorello. I thought, and you have such a wonderful sense of humor yourself as a composer. It's so subtle. Your writing is so subtle and so amusing. And then there's square dance. I mean, Americans have to be reminded that that those Great Plains extend northward, and that Canada also has a great
southward from Canada. Yeah. Absolutely, and
Oh, sorry.
Americans who know the Midwest can. Get every bit of the essence of those poems. It sort of brings them into that world entirely. So I wouldn't say they're limited to Canada in their appeal necessarily. And in point of fact, many American singers have sung them and really enjoyed them.
That's what I meant. And square dance, especially hoedown. Everybody in every Yankee knows hoedown. But this idea that we forget that Canadians also have their Great Plains stories and history and all of that. Let's see. What was I going to say about? Well, it's absolutely charming. It's a perfect encore piece, and there's the fun kind of hoedown country accent that is employed. Yeah, it's very, very clever.
So the Canadian singer Nancy Argento, when she did her Wigmore Hall recital in London, finished it with hoedown, and she had Graham Johnson playing it for her at the piano. So
wow.
that's very. I was very chuffed by that. I thought, wow, imagine hoedown being played in Wigmore Hall.
Well, I can imagine it began because again, we're going to wind it down here, but this is really a superb CD of art songs. It's really beautifully put together, and as you have described, I haven't really discussed it much, but such variety. You're such a versatile composer. So many styles and interests and humors, and then the serious moments. I mean, it's just beautiful. And to say nothing of your compositional skills. I think I've mentioned that when things just are right, they are right. Musicians can just tell, and that's why I asked about how musicians must enjoy singing your music as well. And then again, you're obviously a major pianist. I mean, it's just incredible.
I mean, I do. When I'm writing, I try to use the piano fully. I try to get every possible effect out of it I can. Sometimes I curse my accompaniments when I'm having to play my cycles again. I go back to them and I think, oh my gosh, how did I ever think that someone could play that? Because I get a little bit on the ambitious side. And, having played so often for opera, I really have done so much accompanying of opera rehearsals where I've been as many repetitors do, playing the orchestra score through all the staging rehearsals. And I've really used to thinking of the piano
Uh,
just a keyboard instrument or whatever, and that really affects my piano writing.
could you repeat that? Thinking of the piano as
I think of the piano as an orchestral instrument, or like as a one-person orchestra, and all the effects it can get, all the different colors it can get, its huge range, its polyphonic possibilities, etc. So it really there's so much potential there. All the art song composers I really admire, whether it's Hugo Wolf or Francis Schubert or Benjamin Britten, they all use the piano, in very different, very personal, but incredibly integral ways, and not merely as accompaniment, as we used to say. So that's certainly my school of writing.
yes, and I think all that you mentioned were also prolific pianists. Very, very. One
No,
has
that's right.
one has to be a pianist to write pianistically, maybe, possibly. Forgive me, other composers.
I mean,
Helps a
I
lot.
think it's more like it does help a lot for sure.
Okay, I think we're done. I'm going to put up this interview. We're going to do links and all that good stuff to sales for the CD, videos, pictures. You know how that goes, John, at performingartsreview.net. I'm going to follow with my remarks. I'm looking at the stack here. It's about 2 feet tall now. I think I've caught up on most of the interviews. Now I've got to quickly catch up on my own remarks to throw out, but it's on the site. But it's very important to get your page up right away, because people will have lots of time to browse, and there are quite a decent number of visitors that go to the performingartsreview.net site. So here it is again, Centre Disc release, Sing Me at Midnight. It's a collection of John Greer's art songs, beautiful, beautiful CD, so gorgeously organized, 4 song cycles. Any more would have been too much. Any less would not have been adequate. It's just a perfect CD of vocal music with the best, some of the best singers, Canadian and otherwise, that you have over your years of knowing everybody in sight in opera. You have phoned in some favors. Beautiful, beautiful CD. John, I think we've pretty well covered it. Thank you very much indeed.
For your time and your interest. I really appreciate it, and it's been a pleasure talking about this with you today.
Good. Okay, well, we'll see you again, I hope. See
Okay,
you.
thank you. Best.
Bye-bye.